Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on a, it's muggy. It's muggy and nasty as per usual. There's some birds in the air, but they haven't gotten me. People ask about the goats. I just don't know. I don't want to go to the back of Peter's house because it's full of more weird and strange creatures, and there's a pond with some kind of creepy fish in it, and it's just not the place for me. Plus, it's pretty overgrown back there, so it's moist and muggy and humid, kind of like walking through a jungle. There is one seriously pissed off bird behind me somewhere. There he is, right up there. Right up there, of course, waiting for me to start. There was none of this, 5 minutes ago. And he's looking down, getting the angle of attack right. Little SOB. Anyway, the hell with it. We're just going to keep going forward. And here we are with this. Now, sometimes they come back, and this one did. If you've been watching my videos for a while, and God help you, I really do feel sorry for you doing that. But if you have been, you know that a couple of years ago I had this Corvette for sale, and it has come back. This happens in the car business sometimes. It's not an unusual thing. Sometimes you'll move a car 2, 3, 4, even more times in your life. You sell it to someone, they get sick of it, they want to sell it again, they bring it back to you, or they die, as is the case with this car, unfortunately. But what happens anyway is you get a car back. And I thought, I already have a video of this thing. I've done it once. Do I really need to do another one? Isn't it just going to be a little bit gratuitous? And then I thought, what the hell with it? For one thing, this was done originally at the old Auto Europa location, so it's got all of that stuff going on in the background. And even though the car is driven like a few hundred miles and is virtually unchanged, it was still back then, and this is now. So off we go, and we're going to do this all over again. I am going to vary it mildly. I went and did sort of review that old video to make sure I wouldn't be too repetitive. So hopefully I've come up with a little bit of new information about the mid-year Corvettes, and we will just start diving right into this one. So again, this is a 1960, flies are all back now. God, I hate those things. Anyway, this is a 1964 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray Coupe. This was a very, very successful car for Chevrolet at the time, even though it got off to a pretty rocky start with the first-gen Corvettes. But yeah, we'll get into all that in a minute. These are called the mid-year Corvettes, because it's just a name that's stuck. It doesn't really apply anymore. It was called that when there were 3 generations of Corvettes. The one, the 2 like this one, and then the Shark Corvettes, whatever you want to call them, the C3s. And people, in the 70s who had those 3 gens called these the mid-years because they were the ones in the middle. They also weren't produced for very long, which is a little bit of a shame. But anyway, so Corvette purists today still call them that, even though there's now 8 generations of Corvette, including, the long-awaited for mid-engine version that still seems to be a little bit controversial. But anyway, this was a pretty big deal for Chevy, and it did get off to very humble roots. One thing, though, it does owe an awful lot to the 1938 Adler Trump Wren limousine, which some of you may know that already, some of you may not, and we'll get into it as we go. But this was the first Corvette that was sort of designed and built from the ground up, almost, by real race guys, real car enthusiasts. You've got the likes of Bill Mitchell. I believe he was in charge of the project. Larry Shinoda, a very kind of a renegade designer, a Japanese-American who'd actually been in an internment camp and then was kicked out of design school for, being a little bit too outlawish. And more importantly, and finally, a guy named Zora Arkus-Duntov. And he probably was the most fascinating guy of them all. I mean, this guy was a real badass and a very interesting and cool cat. He was born to Russian parents in Belgium, grew up there. His mom married a mining engineer, and apparently that went well for a while, and then it didn't. She got sick of him, so she went out and married another mining engineer. Well, this is all in the middle of the war where things started to get tough and tight, so they all lived together, which must have been a pretty creepy and weird arrangement to have, two dads and a mom in the same house, but apparently Duntov warmed up to it at some point and ended up hyphenating their rear names. I do like that. I'm going to keep that, actually. And that is, how he became Arkus-Duntov, which is more like an 80s feminist or something, but anyway, so there he was, and he ended up getting a motorcycle in Belgium. His parents didn't like that. He raced it around everywhere. Then they wanted him to get a car, so he did get a car, and he ended up getting a race car, which he, drove on the dirt tracks around there at the time, teaching himself a lot about car control, presumably, and some other stuff. And again, I mean, pretty friggin' interesting guy. He went on then to live in France. He went over there. He married a exotic dancer named Elfie. He ended up getting a job. He ended up making a little bit of money. Then the Nazis came along. He needed to get the hell out of Dodge, so he smuggled money by running gold in a hollowed-out Mercedes. And the guy was pretty interesting. And got his wife out of the country, and he followed her a little while later after hiding out for a while in a bordello. And I'm sure he definitely needed to, to pause there for I'm sorry, honey, I can't get out right away. I have to spend a few more days in this bordello. But anyway, he was hugely involved in not just this car, but in every Corvette, and became known as the father of the Corvette, not the creator of the Corvette. That honor goes to a guy named Harley Earl, probably the most extravagant and famous GM designer in history, who came out with a bunch of stuff you would know today. And GM had decided they wanted a sports car. Harley Earl had driven a Jaguar XK120, so he loved the idea, and they all came together and put together the first Corvette, which was the C1. I'm sorry if this is rambling, but honestly, I mean, you could fill like 80 encyclopedias of Corvette stuff, and even then there's disagreement and varying stories out there. It's hard to get it all together, but anyway, let me just coast along here. So Harley Earl and his team came out with the first Corvette. They patched it together in a hurry, and they displayed it at the 1953 New York Motorama. We've talked about that with various cars before, but the Motorama was an addendum show that was just General Motors at the, sister show to the New York International Auto Show. And the Corvette made a very, very big splash. I mean, it was a racy-looking two-seater, very, very sleek-looking, and had red interior, but had some other issues. But anyway, it was a hit. It drew a huge crowd. People went nuts for it. One of the guys in that crowd was Mr. Arkus-Duntov, and he loved it. He absolutely fell in love with the design. He had come to America, as I mentioned before, and got involved with creating hot rod cylinder heads for the Ford Flathead V8. That, by the way, harkens a little bit to that video we did a couple of weeks ago with the 34 Ford, and how modifying that car and the Flathead V8, which became the famous hot rod engine, spawned a lot of careers in America. And Duntov, after making a little money with war munitions, was one of those guys. So he was making cylinder heads for that V8, which he hooked up with a guy named Allard. They had some success at Indy, not much, but it made a name for him. And then he went to the show, and he looked at this Corvette, looked under the hood, found this anemic little six-cylinder, an automatic transmission, a solid rear axle, shitty brake, shitty steering, and was horrified. So he fires off a letter to General Motors saying, hey, I'm a great guy. You should hire me. I can make the Corvette better. And he attached to it some kind of weird technical paper that he had drawn up about fuel mileage standards or something. So anyway, it was a different time, and GM, they liked his pluck, so they hired him. They made him a development engineer. He did that for like a year or two, and then somehow convinced GM brass that it would be good for them to let him go off to Germany and Europe in total to race 550 Spiders for Team Porsche. Because he had gotten noticed when he was racing cars earlier. So, the guy must have been very convincing. So GM lets him go off. He develops this relationship with Porsche, runs those cars goes for a while, comes back. And by the way, in some ways, that was the birth of the Corvette and 911 rivalry, or the Porsche Corvette rivalry, which still exists today to a large extent. But anyway, he came back. He started trying to add bits and pieces to the C1 Corvette, which he did. He got a V8 in it. He got a handshaker in it. And then they let him design the fuel injection for the hopped-up V8 that would come out in 1957, not just in the Vette, but in some other cars. He modeled that off the Mercedes 300 SL fuel injection system. Actually made it a little more complicated than Mercedes did. That's, true European engineer there. And had some success with that. Then he ran a car, a one-off race car at Sebring in the late 50s, and it taught him a little. It actually was the car that made him want to do a mid-engine car, because he was burning up from the front engine. But that car would go on to become the basis for this, the C2 mid-year Corvette. In fact, the car itself was bought by Bill Mitchell on his own money for not much, like $100 or something, to become the platform for what would become the C2. Here's where it all gets so convoluted. And the head of Chevy had decided that transaxles were going to be the thing in all GM cars. So he commanded all his units to come up with designs that would accommodate a transaxle in the back. That's a transmission mounted between the rear wheels. The only car that ended up with it, by the way, was the Corvair. That did have a transaxle, but it was also, of course, rear engine. But anyway, so Mitchell had to make a design. He gets this young guy named Peter Brock, who models a really attractive car that could become the Q Corvette, the one with the transaxle. But the project gets scrapped, it goes nowhere, and, things start rolling along as usual. Well, a couple of years later, now they need to come up with a design for this, the C2. Mitchell remembers Brock's drawing, so he grabs that, hands it to that Larry Shinoda cat. Again, I'm sorry about all of this. I really, really am, but it's just the damn truth. Hands it to Shinoda. Shinoda starts building the design, off of that, and pens what is, inarguably this rather gorgeous car. But it was a roadster, and it needed to have a roof. And here's where things get a little bit weird. In fact, it's where the, the Ren limousine comes in. And that is how the car got its roof. We'll get into that. So here it is. The Adler Trump Ren limousine was this weird one-off, highly advanced show car, race car, street car made by a guy to revolutionize racing. Typical German stuff. It was very, very revolutionary, and it was built in this German aero style. It was also one of the first designed race cars to have a fixed roof. Most of these things were all open at the time. So anyway, there are maybe 6 of these things built. 3 are known to exist today. And one guy got his hands on one in the United States, a guy named Ruben Halprin. He bought it for a couple grand or something off a Air Force officer who had brought the thing back from Germany. I'm sure half of you are asleep by now, but I promise this is going somewhere. So he buys this thing. The paint looks like shit. He takes it to Earl Scheib. He gets this blue paint job, and he starts running it around Michigan, where he lives. By all accounts, this guy is a bit of a nut. So he goes to the Michigan State Fair in this thing. A guy named Halls, David Halls, he was a GM executive designer. He's at the Michigan State Fair. He sees this crazy-looking thing. I think this is in '59 or something, out in the parking lot. Waits for Ruben to come out. Tells Ruben, hey, you've got to get this thing down to the GM Tech Center. We want to look at it. We want to do something with it. So Halprin gets extremely excited, thinking, oh my God, GM's going to buy my car. I'm going to make a shitload on this thing. He gets a friend to follow him down because he's positive that they're just going to buy it. Well, they don't. They snap a bunch of pictures of it, thank him for his time, and send him on his way. So Halprin is pissed. He goes on home, and later on he would bitch and cry to everybody about how GM ripped him off. But those photos of that Ren limousine got into the hands of Bill Mitchell, who got him into the hands of Shinoda. And as they're looking at him, Mitchell tells Shinoda, this is the roof. This is what I want. This is it. And even though this really isn't proven, I mean, I guess You know, if Shinoda or Mitchell were still around, it could be proven, but they died, so you just don't know. This is hearsay, but it's looking pretty real. But anyway, if you look at the back of this Corvette, particularly a 63 that has the split window, and the back of that Adler Trumpf, you will see a pretty striking similarity that's virtually undeniable. So anyway, theoretically, that is where the famous split window design came from, which, by the way, Duntov, Arkus-Duntov hated it. It was shit for visibility, couldn't stand it. And it went away in this year. 1 year later, 64, no more split window. So, oh, God, to get all that shit out. But, I mean, again, that barely scrapes the surface of how this car went together. I mean, it might have had a hatchback. Some of the early drawings showed an outline for that. The arrow at the back was offensive to Duntov, Arkus-Duntov. He didn't like it, but he was never able to fix it. At least he got the split window done. But Harley Earl had died, so they immediately started de-blinging the Corvette. If you look at the 63 versus the 64, there's less chrome. There's less bling on it, and you know, Harley Earl, they said he would put chrome in a suit if he could. I mean, he was a very chromy guy, and the race guys who were putting together the Corvette wanted, you know, just pure function over form. They wanted everything to be purpose-driven, because this car was for racing in their minds, and it was going to compete with the best race cars in the world, the Ferraris, the Jaguars, the Porsches, that kind of thing. And one can argue, I think, pretty convincingly that they succeeded in that. This car, when it came out, Arkus-Duntov said it's the first Corvette that I would be absolutely proud to drive in the streets of Europe, because I know I can take it to the Europeans. It did reuse the front suspension from the C1, but there's the text coming in. But everything else was virtually unchanged. Unchanged. Everything else was virtually new. Ladder frame, first car from GM to have independent rear suspension, something I believe even Ferraris didn't have at the time. The brakes were... that was a compromise. They wanted disc brakes, but it was too expensive to develop them on top of everything else, so they would come in a couple of years later in 65, just in time for the big blocks, and that, of course, would make a big difference then. It got a recirculating ball steering, which was fancy at the time, 3 turns, lock to lock. Because these guys were racers, the car was pretty stiffly sprung. It did better on smooth race surfaces than it did on bumpy roads. It sort of, I won't say it fell apart on bumpy roads, but it was magical when it was running on something of a race smooth surface, and became more of a handful when it was a little bit bumpy around. You know, you could use the throttle to steer around big corners. It had a natural tendency to understeer, but that was easily overcomable with the V8 under the hood and the posi traction rear. In 63, by the way, there was an RPO, which means regular production order. You know, somebody goes out and orders the car, you know, either the GM dealer or the individual customer. Racing was sort of diminished at the time because there was that big crash at Le Mans, so GM was out of it. But the Corvette guys wanted these cars raced, so they came up with an RPO Z06. There's a number, alphanumeric thing you may know. A very rare package at the time, which gave it the hottest motor, bigger anti-sway bars, a giant fuel tank for less pit stops, and otherwise a bunch of racy bits that would make the car faster on the track. It was also expensive, so not many guys opted for it except the real die-hard racers, and those things are, you know, a split window Z06 car. Again, that's going to end up being an awful lot of money, let's just put it that way, if you're a collector today. But at the time, you know, the car was a little over $4,000. It wasn't cheap, but it was affordable by almost the average cat, much cheaper than all the cars it competed with. And of course, that became a Corvette theme for many, many years. You know, even today, the C8 gives you the performance of cars that cost 3 times as much, and that's always been the Corvette's sort of claim to fame. Also, this was the first Corvette with the pop-up headlights. You can see I've got them there, and that had continued on, I think 04, 05, the C5 anyway. That went for many, many years and became a Corvette feature as well. So, All right, so look, I've got bugs on me. I'm sweating. I've just, you know, sort of pumped out all that stuff that's put half the crowd to sleep. Whoever still remains, all four of you, I'm going to pause now and get my crap together, and then we'll dive into this car in particular. All right, so glass is temporarily defogged and feeling a bit better, so not bad. Corvette, by the way, has sort of been the official car of your midlife crisis since the 1950s for about 70 years and 8 generations. They've been helping old guys look silly for quite a while, including, you know, watching guys like me get in and out of these things. There's not been a Corvette that I've been able to get in and out of without feeling, you know, pretty ridiculous and no way elegant. Whatever impact I've made when I drive up somewhere in my fancy Corvette is completely diminished as I sort of fall and stumble out of the thing, you know, looking like Uncle Jesse getting in the General Lee or something. But anyway, the design of this one is gorgeous, and part of the reason that the doors go into the roof like this is to make it easier to get in and out of, which is why I brought that up. You know, does it work? Maybe. It probably would be much, much worse without it, but it's bad enough. I still have a hard time getting in and out of this thing, and I'm not a particularly big guy. It was the first car, the first Corvette to be designed in a wind tunnel, so it was very aerodynamic. Even though it had a lot more beef than the C1 in terms of almost everything, it actually weighed a bit less, which was good for racing. That was mostly because they had come up with a thinner fiberglass than were used on the original cars, and that shed a lot of weight off it. It was also a little bit shorter. The suspension, again, you know, very much very much upgraded. The front, same as the C1, or at least the late C1s, but that had already been sort of tuned and tweaked by Duntov. And then, of course, the all-new rear suspension that was independent, and the thing really handled. This one is an interesting car. It's finished in desert tan, which is a very rare color. Not too many of them out there. A lot of people seem to absolutely love it. You know, when I first got it, I thought, you know, somebody's going to want red or black or something. I think that does hold true, but it's surprising to me how many people find this color appealing. It also is desert tan inside, which looks quite nice. The fellow who put this together bought himself a very, very nice one, and then spent a buttload more money on it, making it a terrific driver, which, as we get into this car, will do. But the design is stunning. You can see that sort of power bulge in the hood. The remainder of the vents on the side of the hood, or, you know, either side of that hump, they're not operative, but they look cool. Again, the flip-up headlights, the split bumper in the front, gorgeous with that slatty grille right behind it. The integrated sort of cornering lights there under the bumper, very pretty. One of the ways to distinguish these mid-year cars is their different vent treatments on the side. This one, they eventually made them functional, which, of course, is what the race guys wanted, but this one has sort of faux side vents on the fender, Corvette logo above it, a simplified running board from the rocker panel trim, simplified from the one Harley Earl had sort of overseen on the first one. Gorgeous knockoff alloy wheels, absolutely stunning on this car, and they are true knockoffs. So you get this little brass hammer to remove them by, you know, bang, 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 they unspin. And that's not just for looks, but that was kind of a racing thing as well. The roof then from that Adler Trump, if it's true, and you know what, it probably is. But anyway, what a gorgeous roof line this car has, swooping down into the rear, that body line, that crease that runs around the entire car, split rear bumper. This one has the reverse lights, so it's got a red and a white light on either side. Clear light, if you will, and that was an option. If it didn't have the reverse light option, it would have the two red lights. You see the big twice pipes there out the side. Later on, some of the big block cars would get side pipes, maybe to emulate the Cobra, who knows, but that was kind of cool. And this one does have four-wheel drums, which, you know, is a little bit of a shame, but this guy spent a shitload of money to make them work good, and they do. And they weren't just any old drums back then either. They were kind of tuned for racing duty as much as they could be, and that was all pretty cool. Anyway, let's have a look under the hood. Got a hood release down here. I'm getting one side open, I think. There we go. Oh, this is not how I want to do that there. Okay, God. think it's harder when you're older. And here is the original engine to this car, which was a 327-300. There were like 3 or 4 engines you could get, like a 260, maybe one in between, the 300, a 340, a 3... It goes on and on. You could get fuel injection in this, which I think was 375. Maybe not. I'm telling you, it leaves me sometimes. But either way, this was the middle-of-the-road 300-horse 327, and it seems to be the one that most people opted for. Now, if you got that Z06 package, you'd get the big boy. But still, again, a 327. The big blocks didn't come out till 2 years later. You can see under the hood of this car how well it's been restored, put together. I mean, the engine is neat as a pin. It was all rebuilt, as was the transmission, as was the carburetor, as were the brakes, as was the alternator. This was an original AC car, but he upgraded it because the original AC just wasn't that good. So it got a vintage air system. I feel like the camera went a little bit black there. Anyway, it got an original, a vintage AC system that works really good and is nice and cold. Also a flex fan for theoretically better cooling, but who knows. This was also, I think, the first year of an electronic ignition that would be used on this car, and it works pretty well and makes the thing a little bit more responsive, and was another good tweak for racing. But you can see the batteries all over there. They actually shifted the engine and the trans 1 inch to the passenger side of the car to allow for more driver's side legroom. And I presume that's why they ended up putting the battery over there, was to sort of help rebalance that a little bit. But who knows. Anyway, everything nice and lovely and properly restored under the hood, and looking the way, I don't know about the Edelbrock. I mean, that's obviously not correct. I think I probably would have the original air cleaner back on, but people do what they're going to do. Have a look inside. The antenna also offends me a little bit. I do believe this is the way it was from the factory, where it doesn't fully retract. Would have been cool to have a power antenna on a luxury version like this, but is what it is. I suppose the radios were an afterthought. The interior of this car really reflects what I think is the peak of GM build quality and design in the 60s and late 50s, and the golden era, the heyday anyway. I mean, the quality is actually really, really lovely. They retained the dual cowl dash. You can see the 2 humps on either side, although much, much bigger from earlier Corvettes. The Series 1, they made it more pronounced. I presume that's sort of a tip of the hat to fighter jets and fighter planes of the 50s, 40s, whatever, and it looks great. The door panel is gorgeous. It's really a work of art. You've got these 2 reflectors for when the door is open, and the top one, if you move like that, is actually your lock mechanism, which is pretty trick at the time. A lovely little armrest here. I mean, absolutely gorgeous, the way it just goes together in such a nice way. Little chrome trim. This is the door handle, little ball thing, and this will run the vent window, which I don't think anyone's run in a while, so I'm not going to dick with that. But anyway, that will run that. This one has power windows. One of the complaints on the cars without it was the handles would intrude on your bracing. So if you're taking hard corners, left, right, whatever, your knee would end up kind of smashing into the manual window crank. So probably good this one has power. It also had the leather option, which was nice. I think the way that the desert tan matches the desert tan is really lovely in this car. It could have had a hatchback if some of the early photos are correct, but ended up not. So you do get this nice little elegant storage area. I read an original review from Car and Driver on this car last night, and they were talking about, if you need a third passenger, you can lay him across the back, but it's going to be tight, or, maybe he can sit on the center console and share legroom with the passenger, and I absolutely loved it. You would not get that from car magazines today, talking about ways to stuff your infants or toddlers in the back without strapping them in, just as a convenience thing. We've come so far and we've lost so much. But anyway, here on the other side, same story. If we get under here, nice little storage area for guns and jacking hardware and that sort of thing. And a pretty good bit of storage in the back there for, what else? I suppose when we get into the dash and the controls, I should just be in the car and we should just go. So let me button it up there for a minute, get all my crap inside, and then we'll go for a spin. All right, let's do it. So this car really is set up for cruising and luxury, not for insane speed and performance. The guy who had this originally, the one that I got it from, it was not his only Corvette. In fact, not even his only mid-year Corvette. He also had a 66, I believe, a convertible with a 427 in it and a 4-speed, and pretty incredible piece. But he also wanted one with cold air conditioning and automatic that would be nice and tame and drivable, you know, to take his wife out to dinner and such. So that was the purpose of this one for him. You know, if this is something you're in the market for, you can decide what it's for you. But of course, most of these cars did come with the 4-speed manual gearbox, unlike today, by the way. Like Chevy came under flack in the C8 from some guys who said, you know, why isn't there a manual in the damn car? He said, well, yeah, damn it, you people go out and buy it, they said. You know, nobody buys it. Everyone gets the damn automatic. It doesn't merit the cost of development of the manual if you're not going to buy the damn thing, and that's why the new C8 does not come with a, you know, 3-pedal setup. So I guess you can blame the consumer public for that. Probably snowflakes. I hear they don't like driving automatic or don't like driving stick, so who knows. Anyway, the heightened door line and all that with the not too high side bolsters there, unlike the later Corvettes, make it a bit easier for me to get in and out of, but not much. That said, let's do it. Oh God, I just what the hell was that? I don't even want to know. A little box fell over, but anyway, in, doors closed. Oh, I thought I had the keys to the ignition. Oh God, all right, let's get this. Here are the keys. This guy has a bunch of crap on here. I think this is the right one. It's also had a little bit of an issue hot starting lately. Let's see if it still does. I think we have to adjust the timing. Yeah, not too bad. This morning on the fire up, it was instant flawless, so it obviously likes a cold start more than a hot start. But there's that small block Chevy, good old pushrod V8, fires to life and gives you a nice rumble. Let's pull this car forward a little bit. Actually, get some damn air conditioning going. Thank God this car has air conditioning. All right, let's get out of the sun. Okay, for whatever reason, when the guy put this car together, he wanted to make a few upgrades over the factory thing, which is unusual because the car seems to be so factory set up. But he did put in these gauges. They're expensive suckers from Classic Industries, and they work very, very well. And they do look quite cool, so it's not too big a drawback or anything. This is the original Corvette steering wheel. It's got 3 prongs, which was good for racing at the time. No prong above the 9 and 3 even, so that thought was most normal drivers would have somewhere comfortable to put their hands without any incursion from the prongs. You could get telescoping steering, which I don't think this one has, and I'm not going to bother with. It's got your turn signal stock here. You've got volts, you've got fuel, that's always going to be low. You got your miles per hour, 140, you've got your revs, you've got your water temp, and you've got your oil pressure. So every nice gauge covered for you there. This one does have the clock here in the center stack, which is what this is called. It's a thin center stack, so it necessitated the radio being put in sideways, which is a Corvette thing, and this guy replaced it, which I'm actually quite happy about with this Bluetooth unit. I don't remember if he saved the original or not. I may have it, I may not, don't hold me to it. But anyway, this one's nice. It does Bluetooth and has USBs, so I can put my stuff in there and listen to whatever I want in a modern way. He also redid the original controls to work with this vintage AC system. There you see the vent there, got an original vent coming out here, and then another one over there, and it's nice cold air coming out of there, and a nice racy clock. The parking brake is could have been out of an Impala at the time. You would have thought they'd put in a nice handbrake, but they didn't, so that looks like any other Chevy. And then you've got a nice big glove box there with a little thing of touch-up paint. So God, that is stiffly sprung, that thing. There you see Stingray badge. This was the first car to wear the this generation, 63, first car to have that name. They kept using it. It came back in the third gen, but it was one word instead of two. And we won't bring up Steve Irwin either. Anyway, this is the speaker for the stereo, probably just a radio in this car. You got a nice little frail rear view mirror, some lovely simple looking visors, and a nice headliner, and you know, everything nice and simple. Down here in the center console, you've got an ashtray. People did, of course, smoke then. And you've got this cool sort of Mercedes style gated shifter, which works really well. And here are your power window controls. The headlights are a two-step system. So you see you've got a headlight switch here, which looks a little bit like a window switch. If I run that, you can see there they are working up front. And then I can pull this guy and the lights will be on. The dimmer, yeah, there it is. It's up in the foot area, but let's hop up and see that. I get to get in and out of it again. So that is just beautiful. That is a really pretty and cool headlight system. Mitchell didn't want the design of the car being screwed up with headlights. He liked that smooth front end, and they developed these pop-ups at a tremendous cost. I mean, this is part of the reason this car didn't have disc brakes, is because they had to pay a bunch of money to get these headlights going. But they work well and look cool, and we're going to get them right back down and go for a drive. I do like the reverse little chrome wipers, by the way, the little suicide wipers. I think they look awesome. Everything on the car looks awesome, I just gotta say. It's got such an incredible amount of style. It does have seat belts, but frankly, it feels silly. I mean, if I put them on, they're lap belts only. Let's say I get in a collision. Let me get the lights back down. I mean, isn't it just going to hook my waist and send my face and jaw and tooth right into the steering wheel? That's how it kind of feels. All right, I tell you what, I'm not going to wait for Peter's Gate with the video rolling. I'm going to shut it now, and we'll pick it up at the end of the street and take this thing for a spin. The guy who originally had this car spent a ton of money. He did bushings, he did wheel bearings, he did brakes, he did everything on the suspension to refresh all of it, the steering, you name it, and man did it pay off. This thing drives a lot like it probably did when it was new. It feels very tight, nice together, and nice sound coming from that pushrod V8, and pretty smooth shifting out of the Power Glide 2-speed automatic, which is much more my style than all this 9 and 12 and 18-speed crap. I mean, why you have to get in a new Lexus of some variety, and it has more forward gears than a semi? I have no idea. I mean, here it is, 64 Chevrolet. They got away with 2 and nobody was complaining, so that's something for these people to think about. But anyway, the steering feels so nice. The brakes are good and even. There's no pull. The tires are good. This is just a great driving car. And that is true of the time as well. It was considered to be a great driving car. Again, I read that old Car and Driver article. I think I'll link to it from the description if I remember. I'll put a bunch of links, whatever I can find, from some of the stuff I looked at last night. That's really interesting about it. But their main thing was what a treat it was to drive, that it had upped the game so much and became a true contender in the sports car world. Sports card, and collect those. In the sports car world in a way that the C1, you know, only started to show promise for. This one hit it back out of the park. And they were rewarded. You know, initially the Thunderbird came out from Ford and it outsold the Corvette by light years, and that really pissed off GM. And then in 56 or 7, I can't remember, they upped the game of the Corvette and called it America's only real sports car, which was true. The Thunderbird certainly was not. And then the Thunderbird went to this 4-seat arrangement, which didn't help that. In fact, you know, talk about Duntov, why he couldn't just do everything he wanted. Remember, we're talking about GM here and all the characters and nut jobs within it. He had to fight loads of brass to get almost anything he wanted. John DeLorean wanted to make the Corvette a 4-seater. had to fight him on that. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. But anyway, when the Thunderbird lost the plot, Corvette got better, and as a result, these cars sold well. I think there were 20,000 plus 63s, even more 64s, and of course then you're reaching the peak of the muscle car era, and cars are just going insane. They get all these big pocks and 4 speeds, and you could get an M88 Corvette, which only 20 or so people did, with a 500 horsepower engine, and those are pretty magically sought after today from a collector viewpoint. A real holy grail car. But these things were quick, 0 to 60, you know, 5-6 seconds, depending on engine and trans. Quarter mile time in the 14s. Very, very respectable performance out of really crappy tires, you know, in the early 60s. And of course, everything not set up for the technology we have today. So, you know, for the time, this was a true sports car that was fun to drive and had plenty of pep and handled extremely well. And there's that fuel gauge going down. So anyway, there it is. This is, what are we doing here? Is that, yeah, we're in second gear. 1964 Corvette Coupe, absolutely stunning car, fantastic to drive. This one's going to be for sale at Auto House, and if you want to have a look there, I'll link to the website in the description, and or you can give them a call. So thanks very much for tuning in today. We're going to come up with some more fun stuff. The Cordoba, man, it rained, we had the storm, I couldn't get the damn fillers painted. Next week, coming, I promise. And we may even have another Maserati Ghibli video. We'll see if that thing can win back my heart, but I doubt it. And there it is. So thanks again, and we will see you with the next one. Take care.